Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're tackling a huge topic, but we're going to make it super simple. Let's talk about the Cold War. So what was it? Well, imagine two kids in the playground. Let's call them Uncle Sam and the bear. They're the two strongest kids, but they have completely different ideas about how the playground should be run. They don't ever actually throw a punch at each other, but they spend about 45 years staring each other down, calling each other names, and trying to get all the other kids to join their team. That, in a nutshell, was the Cold War. After World War II ended in 1945, the world was left with two major superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. They were allies during the war, but that friendship soured pretty quickly. Why? Because they had fundamentally opposite ideologies. The United States championed capitalism and democracy, think private ownership, free markets, and individual freedoms. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was all about communism, a system where the government controls everything, from factories to farms, all in the name of creating a classless society. They were like oil and water, they just didn't mix. The tension really started to build in Europe. After the war, the Soviet Union didn't pull its troops out of the Eastern European countries it had liberated. Instead, it helped set up communist governments there, creating a buffer zone of friendly states. Winston Churchill famously called this an Iron Curtain that had descended across the continent, separating the communist East from the democratic West. This division was most visible in Germany. The country was split into two: West Germany, which was democratic, and East Germany, which was communist. Even the capital city, Berlin, located deep inside East Germany, was split in half. This division of Europe became the main stage for the early Cold War. So, Uncle Sam and the bear are glaring at each other across the playground. What do they do next? They start building their teams. In 1949, the United States and its Western allies formed a military alliance called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The basic idea was, if you attack one of us, you've attacked all of us. It was a security pact. The Soviet Union responded in 1955 by creating its own military alliance, the Warsaw Pact, which included its Eastern European satellite states. Now, you had two massive, armed camps facing off against each other. The world was officially split into two teams. Now let's talk about the really scary part, the nuclear arms race. In 1945, the U.S. was the only country with atomic bombs. But by 1949, the Soviet Union had developed its own. This kicked off the most terrifying competition in human history. Both sides started stockpiling thousands of nuclear weapons, each more powerful than the last. They developed bombs that could be launched from planes, submarines, and long-range missiles. This created a situation known as mutually assured destruction, or MAD. It's as crazy as it sounds. Both sides knew that if they launched a nuclear attack, the other side would retaliate, and the result would be the complete annihilation of both countries, and probably the world. This terrifying balance of power, ironically, is what prevented a direct, hot war between the two superpowers. Since they couldn't fight each other directly without risking nuclear winter, the U.S. and the Soviet Union started playing chess on a global board. They fought proxy wars instead. This is where they would support opposing sides in conflicts all over the world. A prime example is the Korean War in the early 1950s. The Communist North, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded the South, which was supported by the United States and the UN. The war ended in a stalemate, leaving Korea divided to this day. Another, even more famous example was the Vietnam War. The U.S. got deeply involved to prevent communist North Vietnam from taking over the South. It was a long, brutal, and divisive conflict that the U.S. ultimately lost. These proxy wars were the hot parts of the Cold War, where real battles were fought, and millions of lives were lost, just not directly between American and Soviet soldiers. The competition wasn't just military, it was also about technology and prestige. This brings us to the space race. In 1957, the world was stunned when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first ever artificial satellite. This was a huge propaganda victory for the Soviets and a massive shock to the Americans. It felt like they were falling behind technologically. This lit a fire under the U.S. government, which responded by creating NASA. The race was on. The Soviets got the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. But the ultimate prize was the moon. In 1969, in front of a global television audience, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, declaring, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The U.S. had won the space race, a huge symbolic victory in the Cold War. The Cold War wasn't just fought on battlefields or in space. It was also a battle of spies and secrets. The American CIA and the Soviet KGB were locked in a constant, shadowy game of cat and mouse. They used spies, double agents, and secret technology to gather intelligence on each other. Think James Bond, but with real-world consequences. One of the most tense moments was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The U.S. discovered that the Soviets were secretly installing nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. For 13 days, the world held its breath, teetering on the brink of nuclear war. Thankfully, diplomacy won out, and the crisis was resolved, but it was the closest the world ever came to a full-blown nuclear exchange. So how did it all end? By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was in deep trouble. Its communist economy was stagnant and inefficient. Decades of massive military spending and supporting communist movements around the world had drained its resources. The people were growing tired of the lack of freedom and poor living standards. Then, a new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, came to power. He introduced two revolutionary policies: glasnost, which meant more openness and freedom of speech, and perestroika, which meant restructuring the economy. He hoped these reforms would save the system, but instead, they opened the floodgates of change. People across Eastern Europe, inspired by these new freedoms, began to demand democracy. In 1989, in a moment that symbolized the end of an era, the Berlin Wall came down. People from East and West Berlin swarmed the wall, celebrating together. It was an incredibly powerful and emotional scene broadcast around the world. One by one, the communist regimes in Eastern Europe collapsed. Finally, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself dissolved into 15 independent countries. The bear had collapsed. The Cold War was over. And just like that, a 45-year period of global tension, fear, and competition came to a surprisingly peaceful end. And that is the Cold War, Supersimplified. It was a complex and fascinating period that shaped the world we live in today. From the alliances we have to the technology in our pockets, its legacy is everywhere. I hope this breakdown made it a little easier to understand. If you enjoyed this simplified explanation and want to see more complex topics broken down, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what topic you'd like to see simplified next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.